Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Matt Eanes, Director, PAC PMO. Now, please welcome INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Good morning and welcome to our program. We are pleased here at INSA to host one of our community's top leaders for the first time in our three-part series, Security Policy Series, sponsored by SIMS Software. Always, before we begin, just a couple housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we know you will, please submit them through the question box on the right side of your screen. I love it when you include your name and your organization, but it's certainly not required. We have over 300 registers today, so I'm going to do my best to get to your questions. I would also like to thank our sponsor, SIMS Software, for underwriting this three-part series. And we could not deliver this kind of thought leadership without the support of our sponsor partners. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Matt Eanes, who was named Director of the Performance Accountability Council's Program Management Office, otherwise known as the PAC PMO, in December 2017. In this capacity, Matt leads an interagency group dedicated to improving the U.S. government's ability to assess the trustworthiness of its workforce, which includes civilians, military members, and contractors, focusing on their eligibility for specific roles, access to government IT systems and facilities, and obtaining security clearances, key aspects of personal vetting. Matt is instrumental in driving forward significant reforms and personal vetting actions across the executive branch, particularly through his leadership in the implementation of Trusted Workforce 2.0, otherwise referred to as TW 2.0, which aims to modernize and streamline the vetting process. Previously, Matt applied his expertise as a consultant across various sectors, both in the government and the private sector. Please join me in welcoming Matt to today's conversation. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you're all set with your caffeine, and I'm all set with my hydration water here this morning. But just wanted to kick off with sort of a warm-up question here. When you were appointed as the Director of the Performance Accountability Council's Program Management Office, PAC PMO, in 2017, and we talked about we're not looking back in years, but looking forward in years, what drew you to this role, and how has your time in office been informed by your past roles and experience in the intelligence and national security community?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say thank you to INSA for the opportunity to share the great work we're doing, as well as for the great partnership we've had with INSA over a number of years. You've been a leading voice in this community. And also thank you for an excuse to drink more coffee today.
Happy.
Always appreciate that. As far as what drew me to this role, there's really kind of two boxes that this checked for me. The first is it's a really complex problem set. So intellectually, it's incredibly stimulating. It's a nonlinear problem set. It deals with the whole of government to include industry. So we're talking a very big population. The government is structured in horizontals and verticals, and this is a horizontal problem that cuts across all of that. So it's like there's a big complex system. The second thing that drew me to it and kind of checked the box is it really has an opportunity to make a huge impact and to really make a difference. I have a pretty strong sense of civic duty and pride in my country. And I've always been attracted to government work, and it's kind of always pulled me back in. Just when you think you get out, you come back in for another project. And it's been my favorite projects I worked on as a consultant. And personnel vetting is a mission area that's a support function, kind of like hiring. But if you zoom out, you realize that personnel vetting impacts every single person who works for or on behalf of the government. And every single program in the government needs people. Since everyone needs people, this is an opportunity to, through extension, impact every program that the government services. So it's really a huge opportunity to force multiply impact. If you get outside of the benefits of just better risk management and those type of things, which everyone loves to talk about, if you just think about it from a timeliness perspective alone, we vet around 400,000 new people a year as part of the hiring process, whether they're feds or contractors.
Will you repeat that number for everybody?
It's 400,000.
Yeah.
400,000 a year are the number of new hires that come in federal contractor. So if you just sped up the process 5 days, what you're talking about is giving back 2 million man days to the mission. And that's just at 5 days. So if you start to think about things that could be more bold, so think like 40 days, we're talking about giving back 16 million man days to the mission, which I think that's around 44 years. So that's a huge opportunity to deliver better products and services and goods to the American people, better support our national security. So just really the outsized impact is very attractive to me. As far as how my professional experience as a consultant and working in industry is informing what I'm doing today, I talk to a lot of people now in industry who I speak very fluently in personnel vetting. I'm actually not a practitioner. I've never been an investigator or an adjudicator. I'm a systems engineer by trade. So I spent the majority of my career as a consultant working on pretty complex problem sets. So I think there's probably 3 areas working in that type of a sector that are contributing to the role now. The first is just past delivery and experience on roles. As a consultant, no one ever paid me to like show up to something that was going well and was like, this is going great. Can you just watch it go great? So you're really paid to fix problems, both inside and outside of the government. And I had an opportunity to work with a wealth of talented resources and learn. I think most of all, working in so many sectors and working across the government and working in industry gave me access to what I call the adjacent possible. So what are the things like 1 step or 2 steps out of what we're doing now that someone else may be doing? And because I've seen it, I can pull it into personnel vetting. The second area is I was very blessed to have a very diverse set of clients. I worked across the DoD, the IC, civilian agencies. I even worked with GAO. So each of those entities has its own cultures, its own missions, its own intricacies. So that really gave me the experience to help navigate across the government and a whole of government problem and in a whole of government role. And third, being an executive in industry, not just a consultant, gives you a little bit different of a perspective when you're running a book of business. Yes. So I'm not just learning from my own vetting experience, which is, our own lived experience is an important contributing factor. I got to learn from the aggregate of hundreds of people who worked for me and each of their individual issues that popped up and kind of how those were common across a lot of people. I also got to experience the challenges and duplication and inefficiencies of running contracts and people across multiple clients and people who worked on multiple clients and working across the whole of government. So I think that gave me a unique experience in the government of just how much of a horizontal challenge this is and how important streamlining those efficiencies are to getting people to work and supporting the industrial base.
So you mentioned 400,000 new hires, and we've got some students from Howard, South Florida, Georgetown, George Washington, Maryland, Auburn, University of Mississippi here listening today. And one day they may be a new hire. And so the impact you've had, they should be glad if they're going through the process in the next year or two that it wasn't 7 years ago, but before you got started. But one of your really significant achievements thus far, and we know there will be more, was leading the transition from periodic reinvestigations from that model to a continuous vetting process. Can you talk a little bit about why this transition was needed and how it benefits the workforce and sort of the difference between the two?
Well, first of all, I just want to make sure everyone watching has an appreciation for these aren't necessarily my signature achievements. This is really credit to folks like ODNI and OPM as the policy officials who really blazed a pretty bold and transformative path here. We used periodic reinvestigations for the last 70 years to maintain trust in the workforce. and they led a shift in the policy in only 2 years to completely change that model from a periodic model to a continuous model. It's folks like DCSA, who was the primary ISP here and enrolled most of the people, but also we can't forget the other ISPs who all played ball at the same time, which kept us from having any major reciprocity issues. So you can imagine in an alternative universe, everyone didn't hold hands and get there at the same time, and you can't move people around. But that didn't happen, and that's really a testament to the DCSA and the other ISPs all getting there at the same time and trusting each other. And the agencies for all of the work that they had to do on the enrollment, and last and not least, industry for all of the work that the FSOs did to track people down and get new forms and get release statements and just make sure that we can get everyone enrolled. Just a tremendous amount of work got put into that. And my role was like 0.01% of that. So I get to talk about it a lot, which is really exciting. But the credit and the hard work goes to those type of folks. As far as the reasons for the model and the benefits, I think there's three kind of big things that I'd like to mention. The first is getting the model fixed. Philosophically, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense to continue to vet a trusted insider the way that we vet outsiders. So initial vetting is taking outsiders and turning them into insiders. And then we did a PR on people, which was largely the same product we used for the initial with some small differences. So what continuous vetting does is it changes the paradigm of the model and starts to purpose build it for how to vet trusted insiders. And because this is a purpose-built model, it will better support the scenarios that people go through, but it's also going to translate into a better lived experience for the workforce as we start to implement the reforms. The second area is risk management. Probably no surprise here that it's better for risk management. Previously, problematic behavior would go undetected until the next periodic reinvestigation. So right now we have 4.4 million people enrolled into continuous vetting. In FY24 alone, we've had 54,000 unreported alerts. So in the traditional model, we would have gone another 3 years for a top secret or 7 years for a secret before we would have uncovered that information. So what that means for the process and for the people is that, number one, it gets risky folks and those alerts, we're able to deal with it and manage it. So hopefully we can mitigate it. And if not, then it's an opportunity to work through the process to get high-risk individuals out. So that improves national security and improves the safety of the workforce. But second, an area that doesn't get talked about enough is it gives us an opportunity to intervene early. So what you see in the data is that people don't have events all clustered at the same time. Usually something starts small and then it builds over time. So in the traditional model, it was 7 more years of building on top of that root event before we had an opportunity to discover it and intervene. And by then it might be too late and our only option is to walk the person. In this new model, we're going to identify the issues early, which gives us an opportunity to intervene, which could just be setting an expectation. It could be getting them support through a employee assistance program. And then third is it really improves the mobility of the workforce. So with PRs, you had this cutoff at 5 or 10 years. So folks fell out of scope after they get outside of that range, which then makes it really difficult to move people around who are out of scope, or if you're unfortunate enough to leave when you're out of scope, to get back in, you would have to come through an initial vetting process again. So that created challenges with mobility and moving people around. With continuous vetting, it's a subscription model, so people stay enrolled. There is no concept of out of scope as long as you're affiliated with the government, which then improves the mobility between agencies. And then when folks leave, it improves the ability to get them back into the process.
So I'm going to go back and forth between some questions I have, and then I'm getting some in from some of our viewers. But Dina McMahon asked, what does the personal vetting process look like or feel like for folks who are holding those clearances?
In continuous vetting?
Yes.
So for those folks, it's largely transparent and seamless. So once you come into the workforce and you go through initial vetting and you enroll into continuous vetting, a lot of this stuff is happening on the back end, completely transparent to the individual and placing no burden upon them. The new model of continuous vetting focuses more on risk management. So some of the activity we were doing before that had very low yield, we're not going to be doing those things anymore. So it reduces the burden on individuals who have clean records and are just moving through. And that's the majority of the workforce, to be honest.
Right.
So it's a smoother model as far as the enrollment is. And it also makes it easier for them to move around in between contracts, in between clients, in between organizations.
And is the enrollment optional? Is there like a box you check?
No, unfortunately, this is if you want to work for or on behalf of the government. For the national security population right now, we have the full population enrolled. So it's 100% compliance at this point. We are turning the corners on the non-sensitive public trust population as we speak. We're getting ready for a soft launch of that this fall. But no, it is the new way of doing periodic reinvestigations. So just like that wasn't optional, this isn't optional.
Well, it shouldn't be. That's good to hear. So I want to move on to Trusted Workforce 2.0. Our co-chair of our Security Policy Reform Council, Kathy Fearson, has a couple of questions. And I know she's done some really great work on this and in advocacy for our membership. But she asked, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be aware of all the changes that have been taking place in the security realm over the past 2 years, exactly what is Trusted Workforce 2.0 and what has it accomplished to date? And what can we expect in the months ahead?
Well, that is a great question, and Kathy is a wonderful gem. So Trusted Workforce is an effort to, at its most simplest form, get trusted people to work faster. And there's two components of that are really important. It's not just getting people to work faster, it's getting trusted people to work faster. So as we improve the process, we have to make sure that we retain the quality. Because we are talking about national security, we are talking about the public's trust. So Trusted Workforce is organized into 3 phases. Following some significant program challenges over 2016, 2017, in 2018, we were facing a pretty significant backlog of cases, 725,000 at the time. For anyone who's been around since then, there were significant processing delays, which were really impeding hiring. So it was hard for the government to hire and staff up. It was hard for contractors to get people on contract to deliver. It was really kind of impeding delivering on the mission of the government. So in March of 2018, Trusted Workforce was kicked off, and phase 1 really focused on doing 4 things. The first thing was securing the legacy IT systems following the data breach. The second was reducing the inventory. So during this phase, the inventory was reduced from 725,000 cases to 200,000. The third was improving timeliness. So top secret was reduced from 411 days down to 155 days, and secret was reduced from 173 days down to 53 days. And last, while all of that was going on, securing the systems, reducing the inventory, improving the timeliness, we also were picking up NBIB out of OPM and moving it organizationally over to DoD, plus moving other piece parts, standing up DCSA and kind of getting them formed. So all of that was happening in phase 1 from 2018 to 2020. So phase 1 is done. Well, that's a lot of activity in just the first few years of Trusted Workforce. The second phase started in 2020 with 3 big things that were happening. The first is turning attention to what the new vetting model needed to look like. So before we go to implement a new model, we need to figure out what the aspirational future state looks like. So there was a new framework that was put in place, and it reorganizes vetting into 5 scenarios, which are purpose-built for how people and programs experience the needs of vetting. So the first scenario is initial vetting, which is how do we take outsiders and make them insiders. The second is continuous vetting. How do we continue to vet insiders to ensure that we can continue to trust them? The third is upgrades, because sometimes we have people who come into a lower level position and they need to move into a higher position, and we need to do that quickly, because obviously there's a need to do it if it's being put in, so we need to do it quickly. The fourth is transfer of trust. So we have a lot of individuals who need to move from agency A to agency B. And the last is reestablishment of trust. There's folks who leave the government service, they go back to school, they go to industry and work in the commercial space, they take some time off. We need to get them back into the workforce quickly, because vetting someone you used to trust who just happened to leave the family shortly is different than vetting a stranger.
Right.
So each one of these scenarios has been purpose-built to meet the needs of the scenario. So what the executive agents have done in the second area here is they've rewritten all of the core policies in the last couple of years around these scenarios. So they're purpose-built and structured for how this vetting is done. And within those, they've also put a timer that they're going to be modifying and updating those policies to ensure that they stay consistent with changes to process, changes to technology, changes to societal norms. So we're going to continue to groom and refine the models here. And then the last area in phase 2 is that's all great to talk about the aspirational future state, but what about the now?
Right.
So there was work put into place of what can we do now while we wait on this future model to come into place. And so the transitional states were born from that. So leveraging existing capabilities, we were able to move out on continuous vetting, that second area of shifting from periodic reinvestigations to continuous vetting. We're 100% enrolled in the national security sensitive population now. So that's been a big win. There's more work to do here, but that transitional state allowed us to get out of periodic reinvestigations for the national security population. The second thing that was done under transitional states was improving transfers of trust. We know that there's still some challenges on this in different pockets of the government, but I did want to take a moment to acknowledge DoD, specifically the CAS under DCSA. They reduced the timeliness to do the reciprocity transfer of trust decisions from 40 days to a single business day. So that is a significant reduction. And last, we focused on putting in place capabilities to do preliminary determinations. Industry typically refers to these as interims, if you think about it from the clearance standpoint, but it's making an early decision based off of some data that we can get right away and make a well-informed and solid decision. And that person can enter on duty while the rest of the investigation is playing out. So just last quarter alone, we had 25,000 people enter on duty. Under preliminary determinations, that's 18,000 contractors came in under 7 days and 10,000 feds in under 25 days. So still working to roll that out in full, but significant progress made to date. And that wrapped up phase 2. So phase 2 is done for us now, and we're pivoting into phase 3, which is really implement all of the things for the future state. So this is going to take us several years to get in place. It's an iterative rollout of capability over a number of years, and there's a lot of moving parts. It's pretty widely discussed at this point, but DCSA and DoD announced that they had some challenges recently with NBIS. So that's thrown some bumps in the road early in 2024 for us. And we're currently working through the replanning process with them as they go through their recovery plan. But I will highlight just a couple areas that I think are of most interest to industry and academia as it relates to what's coming in phase 3 for the future. Under initials, there's a significant reduction in the timeliness targets. The EAs pushed out the performance management standards and established new timeliness targets. So for low, that reduces it to 21 days. For moderate, that reduces it to 25 days. And for high, it's 30 to 45 days. And that's the end-to-end process. So that's a significant reduction. We're not going to get there overnight. It is going to be a journey of steadily reducing the time, but we're making a commitment that the future aspirational targets are significantly faster than they are today. We've also, within initials, worked to reduce the number of investigative tiers from 5 to 3, which will further streamline the model. So currently we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 is staying in place for low risk, 2 and 3 are combining into moderate risk, and 4 and 5 are combining into high risk. So that further streamlines that investigative process and speeds up the process. Under continuous vetting, you're going to see us begin to expand into the non-sensitive public trust population. So that's going to happen starting this year. You'll also see some enhanced capabilities coming into continuous vetting to just deal with this huge volume of data and to make connections between disparate data points that we might not have been able to see before we were able to pull this all into one place. Under transfer of trust, this is where I think we're making some significant gains that'll be of a lot of interest to folks like INSA and industry. First, the executive agents have rolled out a framework under transfer of trust to simply kind of create some paths. So think about it as if you live here in DC with me. So think like you're on the Dulles Toll Road. You've got the Easy Pass line, and then the credit card line, the change line, and then the open cash line. So within the new policy, there's these lanes that, depending on what your continuous vetting record looks like, you can either move through really fast, or we need to slow down the process to take a hard look at it. And that's going to be dependent on what we know about it within CV, which makes a lot of sense that if someone's got a completely clean and record, that they should move around pretty seamlessly. But if someone has 60 incidents sitting in the system, well, maybe we want to slow the process down to look at that before we move them from A to B. We've also focused on working a lot with the agencies to understand better what the information needs are. So one of those is a critical area is we've put in requirements for the low side and the high side repositories to store all 3 decisions. A lot of folks don't realize it right now, but there's 3 decisions to get made when someone gets vetted: your national security, your public trust, and your suitability or fitness decision for public trust, and then your credentialing decision. Because the current repositories only store 1 decision, what that means is when someone moves from A to B, that agency may accept the clearance from A reciprocally, but there's no determination in the repository for them to accept the suitability on or the fitness on. So it's not that they don't want to, there's just nothing to reciprocally accept. There's no decision for them to look at because the repositories only store 1 of the 3 decisions. So once we have all 3 decisions stored, that process of the agency B requesting the case so they can look at it just to make the decision that was already made, but they can't see it, will go away. And that'll significantly speed up the transfer of trust process. The second thing that we've done under this is we've looked and worked with the agencies on what exactly do you need to do that decision. So a lot of times they put in a case request to get the file, but what they're really looking for is like 2 pieces of data in it. And so what we've done is we've identified what those pieces of data are, and we've worked with ODNI and DCSA for the repositories to put in future requirements to pull that into the repository so it's available to the agency in session instead of having to request it and wait for it, which will again speed up the process. Also, I mentioned earlier the 5 to 3 model for reduction of the investigative tiers. That doesn't just improve the efficiency of the investigative process, it actually helps with this transfer of trust process as well. So imagine you have someone today in a high-risk public trust position and you want to move them over into a top secret position. What they have to do today is get back in, or they're in a top secret and you want to move them to a high-risk public trust position, either one. So let's say you've got this TS person. Because there's not a decision on file, these people get back in line and they may have to wait 140 days, 120 days, even though they're a current member of the workforce. So by collapsing the tiers, what we've done is you can reuse the investigation within the tier to make that decision. So instead of it being a 100+ day process, that just shrinks it down to pulling up the data and making the decision. So we're taking 100+ days and shrinking it down to under 20 days for those decisions that meet those situations. Within reestablishment of trust, for those folks who want to go back to academia, maybe get an advanced degree, because the new model is better and faster and connects the data better, we're able to take a bit of a different risk management philosophy. So there's been an extension from 2 years to 3 years for the break-in service. And we've got a model to do those high value checks as soon as you come back in, because they're now connected instantly. So that's going to speed up the reestablishment of trust process. As far as measuring all of this, I think folks may be interested to know that there's a new performance management framework the executive agents have rolled out. It puts in place a pretty structured way to manage and measure the process. And it also helps move us towards more centralized collection capabilities. So we're able to capture the right data attributes as things flow through the system, instead of having to do these one-off data calls every quarter, which are then slow and burdensome to the agencies and prone with data quality issues. So that's exciting. As far as how we're going to measure it, just an example with timeliness, there's a couple key changes to how we're measuring timeliness. The first is we currently track the 90% fastest, and that's what we publish publicly. There's going to be a shift to measuring the 100%. So right now, there's 10% tail. And if you do 1 million of these a year, that means there's 100,000 people who are sitting in this tail of the 10%, not the 90%. So as you start to think about someone's lived experience, that's a lot of people who have a different lived experience than the data that we're reporting. And second, there's a change to when the clock is starting in the process. We currently begin capturing and start the clock when the investigation is scheduled. But again, from a lived experience perspective, as an applicant, that's not where I feel it starts. I feel it starts is when I get my application and I start filling it out. So that's where we're going to start the clock, is when the individual begins the process. And then we're going to stop the clock when we make a decision for that person to be able to come on board, which gives us a better measurement of the service that personnel vetting is delivering to the program managers and the programs, to companies, and most importantly, to members of the workforce. So you asked about the months ahead. It's kind of like what's coming up on deck right now. Our focus moving into the last quarter of this year and early FY25, we've got 4 kind of big focus areas. The first is enhancing and expanding continuous vetting. I mentioned several times now the move into CV for the non-sensitive public trust population. That's around 1 million folks that will have to work to getting enrolled, and that will, once complete, it will fully sunset periodic reinvestigations for the government, and we'll have the full national security sensitive and public trust workforce into continuous vetting. The second area is IT, adopting the IT enhancements in the shared services. So INBIS has a lot of activity that's going to be happening next year. There's also work happening on the high side with OD&I to scatter castles, and a system called Taurus, which is meant to address some of the IC reciprocity challenges. So we're very excited about progress on both of those fronts. Third, we're going to continue to work on improving RATBAC enrollments. So RATBAC is the system that keeps track of if you get arrested. It matches your prints to arrest files. So we get an instant notification of any arrest data of folks who've been booked, which is good from a risk management perspective. And it's a very high confidence check because it's biographically linked to the data. So we're going to be improving our RATBAC enrollments. And last, we're going to work on ways to improve operational performance. We've had a pretty significant growth in hiring over the last couple of years. I think industry and government alike have all been on hiring surges to meet the demands for net new programs, but also to just meet the backfills of retirements. There's a lot of folks who are retiring right now. So even if the total numbers aren't going up as much, there's a higher churn of getting people back in. But we're doing all of that with fixed resources because no one's got a plus up in these budgets. So that's caused some of the numbers to creep up in our timeliness. So we're going to be kind of taking a blocking and tackling look at what can we do to make sure that the timeliness stays stabilized. That's been one of the core tenets of Trusted Workforce is we've got to do all of this transformational work, but we can't break today while we do it because this is all necessary to execute on the mission of the government. So it's this fine balance between the two. So we're going to be balancing that scale just to tweak to make sure that we can do that. So you'll see a couple of things come out of that. One will just be efforts to streamline process where we can and yield efficiencies. But also we're going to be working with agencies to increase the usage of preliminary determinations. Not all agencies use those today, so it's used to great effect in the NISP. So DoD does a great job out of VRO of getting industry in, but not everyone participates in the NISP. There's contractors outside of the NISP. There's contractors working in the public trust space. There's contractors working in different capacities. There's also feds who need to come in. So we're going to be looking at expanding preliminary determinations, the usage of that across the government. We're also going to look to expand the usage of e-adjudication. This has been a very successful program now for over a decade of vetting the clean cases as they come through systemically. So a case that is completely clean, that would normally wait in the process for 20 days for an adjudicator to look at it, open it up and spend half an hour reading through everything and making a quick decision because there's nothing to see. That can get e-adjudicated on day one. So then we save 19 days in the process for everyone that meets those criteria. That's like 30-something% of the cases, at least at the secret and below level. So we're going to be looking to expand e-adjudication at the agencies. So between preliminary determinations of using those decisions to keep people on earlier and e-adjudication, which will compress that adjudicative timeline, we're hoping to deliver people to the mission faster next year.
Lofty. I love the fact that you're putting this all out there with the measurements and goals so that it's extremely transparent to the workforce. And I've got like a firing round of a bunch of audience questions that I'd like to get to. Mike Strutman, who is with SIM Software, has a question, and they're our sponsor today. How can the workforce stay informed about Trusted Workforce 2.0?
That is an excellent question. A couple of different ways. The first is performance.gov. If you go to performance.gov and you click up on, I think it's initiatives at the top, the third link down is called Trusted Workforce 2.0. We publicly report quarterly on progress for Trusted Workforce, and we have for years. So you can go there and you can see the latest quarter, but you can also go back and see every previous quarter. Within that, you'll see 3 core sections in performance.gov. Up front, we try to highlight for the reader what the most important things that happened during the quarter were. So we summarize those and we try to give context. The second section within there is all of the milestones or all of the key milestones. We provide the status, when it's going to happen, if it's on track or not on track, and then we give an explanation of what progress has been made or what challenges are we facing. And we're pretty transparent about that. So if you go up on last quarter's report, following our discussions with the NBIS challenges, we marked a bunch of the milestones at risk because they're contingent on the new NBIS plan. So instead of just leaving those on track or marking them at risk, we provided a lot of transparency to talk about what's going on and why. And then the last section of performance.gov update, the third one is metrics. We've got a whole series of metrics that you can monitor the progress. So I've mentioned a couple of those today. The timeliness statistics are up there. The preliminary determination data that I mentioned is up there, both in terms of how many, the count, and the speed. The CV data is up there for how many we've got enrolled, but also how many alerts are coming in, already known alerts and not known alerts. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can on the progress that we're making from reform, but also on the data so that folks can watch the story and measure the health of the program. I think the second area is always tune into the hearings as they happen. We generally have somebody having to testify once or twice a year. It's not always the most comfortable experience, but it's a necessary experience because it's important to have the right balance of powers within the government, and that's a critical role. And we enjoy our partnership with the Hill. So I know there's probably going to be a couple hearings upcoming, so tune into those to get progress. Obviously, read about that as they get posted online for the various folks who cover them. And third, one that you might not think about, but monitor GAO. They do a pretty good job of keeping us honest of where we're doing good and where we're not. They do excellent work, and we've had a long-standing partnership with them. At the end of this year, GAO will be updating their high-risk list. They do that every 2 years. So I don't think we're going to come off the high risk this year, but we have made significant progress to addressing a large number of open GAO recommendations. Probably not enough to come off the high risk list, but we do hope that GAO, when we get to the end of the year, is going to acknowledge how many we've knocked out, and then hopefully sets us up to be on a good pathway for the future. So performance.gov, keep track of the hearings, and watch for any GAO postings.
Great. So I have 2 or 3 more audience questions, and I'm getting alerts that I have about 2 or 3 more minutes. So we're going to do a really quick firing round, and I'm working on my Yelp review, and I don't want our viewers to give me a bad Yelp review. So here we go. Rich Durand says, thank you, Matt, for sharing your morning and your coffee with us. He's curious if you could provide any additional insights into the reciprocity improvements in the IC that you referenced earlier.
Okay, so there's a couple things that are happening there. The IC security directors and OD&I have had a number of workshops and meetings to talk through kind of the details and the components and the piece parts. So there's 2 major things that are happening. The first is the new policies create something called transfer of trust, which is, if you think about it, it is a reciprocity is a child of that. So reciprocity feeds into a concept of transfer of trust, which is more than just the security decision. Because when someone moves from A to B, we have their security decision to deal with, we have their fitness or suitability decision to deal with, and we have potentially a credentialing decision to deal with. So sometimes people move from A to B, and national security is fine, but that person gets hung up in a suitability or fitness review. So transfer of trust pulls all of those 3 things together, not just reciprocity, which is a narrowly defined security review, and it only applies to the clean cases. So transfer of trust handles the not clean cases, and it handles all 3 domains. And then if you think about transfer of trust, that's just a child of a larger concept of mobility, which is the personnel vetting piece, which is transfer of trust. But you also have contracts and acquisition and IT and onboarding and a bunch of other things. So those other pieces are out of our area, but we have paid a nod to those in the policies to say transfer of trust is just one portion of the process of a larger mobility problem. And here's what we're doing within personnel vetting and transfer of trust. So the new policy, as I said earlier, creates those toll booth lanes. So as that gets implemented, more people will move through those lanes more seamlessly. The second major thing that has been done is work to identify what information is needed by the gaining agency in order to bring someone on. Because right now the repositories don't have enough information to make those decisions quickly, which then results in agencies having to make file requests. And then the file request process takes people time to go pull the file, package it together because it's in multiple piece parts, and then get it over to the other agency. And while they do that, they're taking a resource off of doing an adjudication or off of doing an investigation. So it just kind of puts friction in the gears of the process. So by identifying the data attributes that are needed and getting them into the repositories, that'll allow the gaining agency to see the information they need without having to put the file request. So those 2 things are happening right now. D&I is building or plans to build a system that holds this information. We're currently working through the process of getting it funded. And we know funding is a challenging concept this year for a lot of folks. So we're really crossing our fingers that we get it funded and up and rolling, because it will solve decade-long problems in the IC.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't have time for this last question, but I did want to highlight it. A gentleman by the name of Paul Days, who is a PhD student in counterterrorism. He is currently working on his vetting dissertation, and he's a current background investigator, has a question. My guess is he would benefit from about a 10-minute follow-up conversation with you. Would it be possible if Paul reaches out to me, if I could make a virtual introduction?
Of course, I'm super accessible. So.
Okay, I mean, impressive dissertation, and I think you could really add some value to that. So, Matt, we are in good hands. Thank you for your, and I know you don't like me bringing it up, 7 years of service. We hope you stick around for another 7 years, and are really encouraged about the progress you have made working with other government partners, and what the future holds for those who are currently cleared, as well as those who are looking at going through the clearance process.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Also wanted to thank Sim Software for sponsoring this 3-part series. The next one will take place on August 14th with our speaker, David Cattler, the new director of DCSA. So start preparing your questions now that perhaps we didn't get to today. And thank you to all of you all for watching online. A quick survey will come out, as I mentioned in my Yelp rating. Please feel free to fill that out. Let us know who you want to hear from in the future. And then I just wanted to point out next week, June 26th and 27th, we'll be holding our Fort Meade Common Threads 2-part series focused on cyber security and hunt forward operations. There's an unclassified evening program followed the next morning by a classified panel. And we will be doing that out of the BWI Marriott. And then the classified panel will be at Arliss, University of Maryland, hosting us. And I'd also want to mention our new IC on Wednesday, July 17th, held at Army Navy Country Club in Arlington. It is a full-day program focusing on workplace issues impacting both women and men in the intelligence community. And then we have a terrific lineup of speakers. We have CIA CIO Linnea Jones as the morning keynote, and the National Cyber Director, the Honorable Harry Coker, will be joining us in the afternoon. Please check out our website for a full lineup. We have several more coffee and conversations scheduled this summer. And then closing out July on July 30th with General Timothy Hawk, who is the Commander, U.S. Cyber Command and Director of NSA. He'll be joining us for a leadership dinner. This concludes this morning's program. Thank you again for joining us, and a shout out to Sim Software and Matt for joining us for his coffee and conversation this morning. Have a good day.